a monk's life should always be like a Lenten observance. Since few are capable of this, we urge that during Lent we conduct our lives with the greatest possible purity. That's out of the rule of Saint Benedict, which we have been talking about, I don't know how many weeks now, maybe 6 or 7, 8 weeks now. Just taking little tiny portions of it, more like thoughts, barely even touching on the actual rule and what monks did, and just talking about how that actually can be brought into everyday life. Since I'm not a monk, you're probably not a monk, and I really don't have a whole lot to say out of the sort of an experience of being a Benedictine or anything like that. But it is Easter coming up here, at least for us in the West, for me in Germany, on Sunday, which means even if you aren't in a church that follows the church calendar, such as my church doesn't follow the church calendar, most people do know that this is the week of Easter, and therefore do have some Easter-like thoughts. And I thought I should read that passage there, that this idea of during Lent is this idea that we should all kind of become like monks. At least that's what Benedict wants. He has this idea that Lent is a special kind of time, and really for his monks, he wants to extend that time into the whole year. Well, we've been trying to do something like that, talking about these elements of Benedict's rule, and there's no way we're going to get done with it. I kind of knew that. I had a little list of things that I wanted to talk about, and I probably only got a third of them talked about. Maybe we'll return to that later on, maybe not. But today, last week on Rule of Saint Benedict, and I thought I'd just talk about some things that had occurred to me. Yeah. Well, hey everybody, welcome to the Sanctus Forum. I am Michael Stewart Robb, better known as Mike, and I have been doing some Lenten practices. Maybe you have been too. As announced many weeks ago, I was trying to create a little bit of a digital cloister for myself in which I wasn't looking at any email, any messages until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I wasn't going to look at any news sites or anything like that, websites, until 6 o'clock. And I have been doing okay with that. I found that for writing or creating something like this, the quiet of the morning, no emails, was really good. But on other days, I needed to sort of be in there and be in touch with people, and then I couldn't quite avoid my own email inbox, and I had to sort of know what was happening and all of that. So it only worked to some degree, but it did keep me from going directly to my emails right away, and hopefully made me a little bit more proactive in emailing. And the thing with the news, looking at news, that actually worked pretty well, and I hopefully can keep up something like that throughout the year. Same with the email. It's kind of good to sort of push that back as far as possible and start the day in silence. I have also been not eating sugar at all for Lent, and that has been really difficult for me. I do eat, I guess, quite a bit of sugar in a normal week and in a normal day, and I found myself just really craving something many times. I didn't exactly cheat during Lent, but I took a couple days off, obviously for hospitality if somebody's having a party or serving us dessert or something like that. But also just for my own sanity a little bit, because, hey, this isn't, I'm not trying to impress God with this. It's more something for me than it is something that I'm going to use to, make God happier or something like that. So, I took a couple days off just to kind of reset and get myself back into it. So that's how it's going for me. I wonder how your Lenten practice, if you had one, went for you. Let me know in the comments if that's something that you'd like to tell me about. I like being interactive with you as much as possible. Well, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today was I was sharing what I did on a previous video, the one about abbots and about spiritual adults and about growing in Christ through joining your life to a spiritual adult, coming in contact with them and seeing how they live. And I was sharing this with a group of people in Dublin who were very interested in spiritual growth there as a church. And I was saying that the Benedictine model was to sort of live by example first and to sort of show people through the way that you lived how they could grow spiritually. And then second, when those people were interested, to talk and speak about it. And somebody made this really fascinating comment. They said, well, we in our churches, Protestant churches, we do the opposite, really. We speak first, we preach, we teach, we tell people this is what you ought to do, and then maybe we will back it up with some real life examples. And in that moment, I kind of stumbled and I couldn't quite think about how things really worked for the reformers, which is really true. What they really wanted to have was churches which were places of preaching and teaching. And they didn't put the living example of the spiritual life of a spiritual father or mother in the center of their church communities. And the other thing to mention that I discovered afterwards is really there is no provision for teaching and preaching in this rule. There's no point in which Benedict says, oh, well, make sure that you have somebody who's preaching the word of God to you, who's telling the gospel to you, who make sure you have an appointment of a teacher. He's got all these appointments for deans and for somebody who's in charge of the storage and for the cook and for the abbots and all that. But there's nobody who is in charge of teaching the monks. And I guess I have a couple comments about that. And one that I've thought about is when Benedict was writing this, teachers were hard to come by. He's not saying we shouldn't have teachers and preachers, but in a barbarian time, that's one of the rarest things that you probably could have found in his century, is just a really good teacher. Because in order to have teachers, you have to have schools, and in order to have schools, you have to have some kind of stable civilization. And so what he's doing is much closer to what's possible. You just find people who are exemplary in terms of their life, and then you gather other people around them. The second thing that I've realized is that in this rule, the substitute for a lack of teachers is study. The monks are encouraged to read. They're encouraged to read the Bible. They're encouraged to read certain types of books, and to do that in their own time. And the monastery in his day was the source for learning to read and learning to work with books. By and large, nobody else can read. The other side of it is not just study, but also being read to. So there are a number of chapters in the rule, I'm pointing to the rule here, in which he talks about how the monks are going to be read to, and that's during meal times. If you've ever been to a Benedictine monastery, eaten with the monks, they have somebody who read particular books to them. So that's where a lot of the education comes from. Obviously not quite the same as a preacher, which is, again, interesting, that there's nothing about that in there. And obviously the reformers saw this lack, I guess, in their world in medieval Europe, and they thought, we need to bring that in. And one of the things that I have also thought about, and this is probably worthy of a historical study to see if you could actually prove this or not, but Roman Catholic ministers tend to be modeled on the monk. That is, they're not so focused on the preaching and teaching aspects of their role. Of course, the distribution of sacraments is an important part of their role, but this idea that they lead by example, they lead by the sanctity of their life and by the sort of difference that they have. Whereas Protestant ministers aren't modeled on the monk, the Reformers modeled them more on the ancient philosopher. The ancient philosopher of Greece was a teacher, was a teacher in society, a wise person, somebody who could speak. And actually, in the early centuries of Christianity, that is a lot of how Christians thought about themselves, and they had then a number of very worthy teachers and preachers. And what happens, I think, in Protestantism is that they revive this idea and they try to develop congregations around people who can preach and teach. I don't think that we should put these models in opposition to one another. We shouldn't say, well, we should only lead by example, or we should only start with preaching and teaching, and make that the center of our work. But it is interesting to think about where we are now in Europe, and what do we actually need now for our time? I mean, do we need something that's more like the rule of Saint Benedict? Do we need to emphasize reading and study? Or do we need to emphasize the priority of preaching and teaching? Do we need to find people who are capable of leading us through their words and through their knowledge and through their understanding? I don't really have an answer to that. I do know that I think we live in an age of a new illiteracy, that people can't really read as they used to. You can't hand people books and expect that they will just read them. Even books that are on their level, it's very hard for people to find books that are on people's level. And at the same time, we're kind of having difficulty in Europe finding people who can teach, who can organize a group together based on their ability to preach and teach. And some of that may be just even the mechanics of how do you teach? How do you preach? We do have educated people, but they may not be able to pass that education on to others. On the other hand, we may also lack educated people, which gets back to this inability to read, which is a good part of how you're going to be educated. So I don't really know. I just know that there are some issues here which need to be worked out. And I think this sort of leading by example is just going to be the way it is all the time. I mean, we're just going to have to start with ourselves and think about how we can pursue God ourselves, and then just lead the way that way. We have to pull discipleship rather than push it. Just to finish here, and this is probably a bit of a longer video, I want to recommend a book here by Jean Leclerc. I think that's how you pronounce his name. The Love of Learning and the Desire for God. I'm not completely done with it. I've just, maybe I got a third of the way through. It is on the European culture during the height of the monastic period. So I think 5th century to 10th century AD is what he's dealing with. There's a chapter on Benedict and on Gregory the Great, and he tries to describe what European culture was like during this time when Benedict's rule was king. And if you want to go deeper on this issue, this is where to go. This is how I'm going deeper, and really fascinating things like the importance of teaching people to read during this time, which is maybe something that we need to be doing again, teaching people how to read, because for some reason or another, schools and the main spokespeople in our lives aren't helping us with that. Well, I will see you after Easter, probably, if you're seeing this before Easter. and we'll be talking about something other than Benedict's rule, so you might be happy about that. But until then, see ya. Bye. Oh yeah, there's a couch behind me that probably will be gone next time. So